privilege to introduce my next speaker. Gosh, I've known Senator Brogdon. When did you join OPAC?
Probably
9 years ago. Described by Charlie Meadows often as the conscience, moral conscience of the Oklahoma State Senate. He is actually known nationwide due to his appearances on several primetime or different nationwide broadcast radio and occasionally TV. He's a businessman from near Tulsa. He was in business for 30 years, and as many of us, we became very alarmed with what was going on in our nation, and so he decided to do something about it, and he became mayor of Owasso, wasn't it, at that time? About 2000 and when? 2000. And then he wanted to do something more about it, so he decided to run for the Oklahoma State Senate in 2002, and we are glad he did. Randy ran for governor in this state, and he got about double what the polls showed he might get, but he came up 4% shy of a runoff for the gubernatorial election here in the state of Oklahoma. He's recently this year founded Freedom's Role Institute, a nonprofit, and he's working on educating the voters of Oklahoma regarding, 11 questions on the state ballot, rather confusing, so he's using his time to do that. His hobbies including running, golfing, and such as that, but he's really in the freedom fight. Welcome our dear friend, Senator Randy Brogdon.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I appreciate that very warm welcome. Clark, thank you for the introduction. I want to introduce my most favorite person in the entire world. She is with me today. I'd like to introduce you to my high school sweetheart and my bride of 38 years. Donna, would you please stand? I found her when we were both young. I fell in love when I was a senior in high school, and I think 3 years later, or 2 years later after that, after 1 year of my college, we got married. We started a family shortly after that. We have successfully raised two little boys, which are about 20 months apart, into two fine young men. I have one daughter-in-law, and I'm a wannabe grandpa, and I don't have any of those yet, but I have truly been blessed with my family. Clark talked about that in just a moment, how important families are, and for those of you that have a stable family environment, you know exactly what I'm talking about. My dad, I spent 17 years in business with my dad. I got a great story, which is not part of my notes here, but since he wanted us to talk a little bit about my family, I can't talk about my family without mentioning my dad, my best friend, my mentor, my business partner, until he suddenly passed away in 1989. But when I was a senior in high school, I loaned my dad $500 and my 1963 Chevy so Dad could fulfill his version of this great American dream. And he started our family business. And after I went off to college and got trained in the air conditioning business, I came back, and for 17 years, Dad and I worked side by side building that business together. And it was because of those strong family ties, the work ethic, all of the things that my family has poured into my life. I've been able to do that to my sons, and hopefully we will have opportunities to get back to what I call getting back to the basics, the very things that have made this country great. And I'm going to be talking about a few of those things today, but I'm excited about this opportunity to be with you today. And I appreciate you being here as well. I know you are from all over the country, so welcome to Oklahoma. I'm going to give a little bit different speech today than you might normally hear sometimes at some of these events. And Jack, where'd Jack go? He was in here a while ago, but the last time I gave a speech and Jack was there and Art was there, and I said, I kind of feel like the old jockey who took the old farmer who took his donkey to the Kentucky Derby, and he was lined up in the chute with all those thoroughbreds, and And all the jockeys were making fun of him, saying, "What are you doing here? You don't even have a chance of winning." You know, I'm sharing the stage with some pretty heavyweights today that you're going to hear some outstanding things in this seminar throughout the day and this evening. And so as the jockeys made fun of this old farmer sitting on his donkey, he said, "Well, I don't really expect to win. I just thought the association would do us both some good." And so that's kind of the way that I feel today. I entitled my speech, and I've already met a couple of you that may have heard this speech because I gave it down in Fort Worth just about 3 weeks ago. It was the first time I gave this particular speech. Now, my jokes are old, so but I do the same jokes all the time. But this speech is different. Now, I entitled it Crossing the Delaware. And back in 1776, on December the 23rd, the Battle of Trenton was fought. And General George Washington was trying to rally his troops, and they were getting ready to cross the Delaware and fight the Battle of Trenton. Now, Washington had already lost 5 previous battles, and his troops were demoralized. They were ill-equipped to fight another battle. A lot of his soldiers didn't have shoes. They didn't have enough ammunition. They had lost, and they just had this defeatist attitude. Washington was also faced with the reality that 6,000 of his soldiers were getting ready to rotate out of service. But he wasn't only having to fight the British at this time, he was having to fight Congress because he could not get the proper supplies for his soldiers. And on December the 23rd, after losing those 5 battles and thousands of men left on the battlefield, what was left of General Washington's ragged army that night stood in formation. He called them to attention on a cold, bitter winter night to hear a message from Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine said this to those soldiers. He said, "The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot," in other words, the part-timers, those who are not really invested, those who are not willing to go the extra mile, he said, they will shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands now deserves the honor and the love of man and women. The soldiers that night, cold, hungry, discouraged, homesick, they got a new revelation that night of what their mission was. You see, their mission was freedom. That's what they were fighting for. And 2 nights later on Christmas, they crossed the Delaware. And they engaged the enemy one more time, not necessarily knowing what the outcome of that battle would be, because the outcome had not been good in the 5 previous battles that they fought. The weather was so cold that night they crossed, they actually lost 2 of the soldiers. They froze to death crossing. Nonetheless, that night the Battle of Trenton was fought, and it proved to be a turning point in the Revolutionary War. Washington's army captured over 1,000 Haitian soldiers that night. They were allies of the British, and they did it without one single American soldier being lost. But you know what? That night before they crossed the Delaware, that defeated army, they had every reason to shrink back from the service and the call of their country. They had every reason to give up because they had been defeated time and time again. But evidently Thomas Paine's words inspired those soldiers. And I'm afraid too often in today's world, when things get tough, and when the odds of success seem just out of reach, and we're not going to be able to get there, we can't accomplish what we want to accomplish, I'm afraid it's easier for us to shrink back. But folks, our country is calling us back to service today. And my challenge to you today is to renew your commitment to the mission. And I want to remind you that our mission is freedom. Our mission is the restoration of what has made America great throughout the generations. And I'm asking you today to rededicate yourself and be willing to cross the Delaware one more time. Thomas Paine said that these are the times that will try men's souls. He said that during a time when the Patriots were fighting for the very existence of this country. They were fighting for their freedom. They were fighting for their farms, their family, for everything that they believed in. And you know what's amazing? They didn't know what the outcome would be. What if they won? What were they going to win? You see, they didn't have the America that we have today. What if they lost? What are they truly going to lose? They didn't really know. But those men were engaged in protecting and promoting freedom. Well, I believe that today everyone in this room realizes that these two are trying times in which we live. We have problems today. The stock markets, the ups and downs, business uncertainty, the highest unemployment in 27 or 8 years. The bailouts, the stimulus schemes. All of these things are problems that every single American are facing today. But I wonder if most Americans realize that what I just described are just symptoms of something much greater. Those are just the symptoms of problems that are deep-rooted in America today. What's the problem? Folks, we're stuck on the other side of the Delaware today. We've been left out in the cold. We, the people, have been left on the other side. And oftentimes we feel discouraged, and we wonder, can we make a difference? We've allowed the politicians in Washington, D.C. to trample on the rights and the sovereignty of our states. And I'm asking you again today, are you going to be willing to cross the Delaware and face the enemy? It's the only thing, folks, that's going to save the direction that our country is going in. For the last 234 years, each generation has protected our freedom. Each generation has secured the blessings of liberty and passed them down to the next. But this generation in which we're living today, we have settled for corruption from our politicians. We've settled for reckless behavior and ignorance from those who serve us. I want to let you know today that America's hope is not in Barack Obama. America's hope and America's future lies within the 50 sovereign states, not in the foolishness of Washington, D.C. I believe that when governors around this nation begin to realize their responsibility, when they begin to understand what their authority is to protect the citizens of their states, to stand with the people and guard against an overreaching and an overbearing and an even tyrannical federal government, when our governors and our attorney generals around this nation get a clear vision of that, folks, we will have an opportunity to solve America's problems. See if this sounds familiar to you. It's been said that money dominates all aspects of life. Elections were held and decided by vast campaign contributions. Elected officials and senators were controlled by vested interest groups. Corporate and personal greed has reached shocking levels. Despite immense wealth, the Senate was unable to develop economic policies to prevent financial crisis. Despite military might, the Senate proved unable to deal with rogue states on its borders, to protect the citizens against terrorism at home. And ordinary citizens feel powerless to effect change in their political system. Sounds like America, doesn't it? But you know what? That wasn't written about America. That was written about Rome just before the fall of the great Roman Empire. And as the saying goes, if we don't learn from history, it's bound to repeat itself. Well, rather than repeat our failures time and time and time again, I've got a better idea. Let's ensure our success. Let's secure the blessings of liberty that was handed to us. Folks, it's our turn. It is our time to pass freedom down. I can tell you, after serving the last 8 years in the Oklahoma State Senate, a remarkable experience, one I'll never forget. But I can tell you the battle lines have been drawn between the states and the federal government. I can tell you that because I've drawn some of them. And other state legislators are beginning to realize what their duty, what their call to duty is all about. It is to promote and to protect freedom within their states. The federal government has grown out of control in things outside of their jurisdiction. And they have become slothful in the things and operating within the things that are in their jurisdictions. Things like Obamacare, cap and trade, illegal immigration, the Federal Reserve, the North American Union, the NAFTA Superhighway, the Real ID Act. All of these are undermining the security and the freedom of not just America, but the state of Oklahoma, the state of Texas, California, wherever you come from. These kinds of unconstitutional federal policies are destroying the very fabric of America today. Have you ever wondered why our borders are not secure? Here's a newsflash for you. Our leaders don't want the border secure. That's why. And this is a bipartisan issue, folks. Under the Bush administration, the Security and Prosperity Partnership Agreement, I'm sure you've heard about, the stated goal for the SPP is, quote, to eliminate the trade and security borders of North America and to allow for the free movement of goods, services, and people across U.S. borders. You remember the Real ID Act of 2005? Congress told the citizens of Oklahoma and every other state in the Union what kind of information we had to put on our Oklahoma driver's license. Things like fingerprint imaging, biometric facial recognition, the potential of retina scanning just to get a driver's license. The Real ID Act provided for the sharing of your information on an international database. Let me just share with you for a second. Congress has no authority to do such a thing. That violates the Constitution. It tramples on the First, the Fourth, and the 10th Amendment. But we've been told by the politicians not to fear. Don't worry about these things. Everything's going to be all right. We're doing this for you. You see, the government would tell us, if we know where you are, we're going to be better able to protect you. And we have been lulled into a false sense of security in America today. I don't know about you, but I just don't believe everything that government tells me. I kind of tend to lean towards the old Reagan thought. You know, government doesn't have all the answers. Government's the biggest problem that we have today in America. Well, what is the answer? You're the answer. The answer lies within us. You see, it's time that we face the enemy. And let me remind you where the enemy is today. It's in Washington, D.C. We are being attacked from within. We have been warned for decades about the moment that we're living in today. And it's our turn, folks, to cross the Delaware. It's our time to face the enemy. It's our turn to reclaim the God-given rights that have been handed to us. We must secure them once again and pass them down. And if you're like me, you get tired. Sometimes you just get worn out. Sometimes you wonder, it's just me, can I make a difference? One of our brilliant legal minds recently stated that one honest voice can be louder than the crowd. Everyone can be going off in this direction, doing the wrong thing. It just takes one person to stand up and do the right thing. By the way, that was Reese Witherspoon in Legally Blonde 2 that said that. But the message is clear to me. One honest voice can be louder than the crowd. Folks, it's going to take you, and it's going to take me to salvage the freedom that's been handed to us. It's going to take someone to draw the line in the sand. Well, we've done that here in Oklahoma. We've drawn the line. A few years ago, with the odds against us, with success out of reach, With everything working against us politically, we were starving, we were cold, we were on the other side of the Delaware, we were discouraged at what was going on in the state of Oklahoma. But we crossed the Delaware, and we began the process of nullifying unconstitutional acts perpetrated on the citizens of Oklahoma. We began reclaiming our state sovereignty by nullifying unconstitutional acts of the federal government. 3 years ago, I wrote legislation to opt out of that Real ID bill that I described a while ago. And we were told, not just told, we were threatened by Homeland Security. If this bill passes, the citizens of Oklahoma won't be able to get on an airplane. You won't be able to go into a federal building. You can't go into a federal courthouse, the post office. Life as you know it in the state of Oklahoma is over if the state of Oklahoma insists on trying to opt out of this Real ID bill. We were being told that Congress would withhold our money, our state money that we collect here in the state, and send it for some unknown reason to Washington, D.C. and ask and beg for part of it back. They said, we're not going to give it back to you. Well, folks, we were actually being blackmailed by the politicians. But we didn't bend. We didn't get scared. We drew the line in the sand, and we dared Congress to step over it. And let me tell you where Congress is today. They're still on the other side of the Delaware. We passed that bill, and you know what? Since that time, 37 other states followed suit. They have written similar legislation. They too have opted out, written resolutions to not comply with this unconstitutional act. Janet Napolitano stood before the cameras about 6 months ago now, and she made an amazing statement. She said the Real ID Act is dead because the states just wouldn't cooperate. I believe in capitalism, and I believe in Americanism, and those kinds of that kind of legislation violates both. This year, Obamacare is going to be on the ballot in the state of Oklahoma, another unconstitutional act perpetrated on the citizens of every state in this country. But I wrote legislation this last year to do just like we did with Real ID. Opt out. We're not going to do it. We're not going to play the unconstitutional acts by the federal government. And the citizens of Oklahoma this year will be making the decisions on their health care rather than the politicians in Washington, D.C. I think that's good for America. Folks, I'm convinced without any shadow of a doubt, if we are going to salvage what's left of our great country, it'll be done at the state level. If we're going to restore our freedom and pass it down, it will be through the nullification process. Restoring our states' rights, preventing the federal government from imposing unconstitutional acts. They're not law if they're unconstitutional, folks. It's just not. An unconstitutional act is not law, and it is absolutely void. The states are not bound to submit to that. As a matter of fact, it is the duty of the state legislature. It's the duty of the governors of the states to protect the citizens from this kind of oppressive, unconstitutional acts perpetrated on our states and on the sovereignty of the citizens. And let me take it a step further. Any legislator, any governor, any attorney general who coerce their citizens into submission to these unconstitutional acts should be removed from office immediately. I believe that nullification, getting rid of these unconstitutional acts, will save our country. It'll get us back on the right track. You see, nullification allows the citizens to enjoy the rule of law. It allows us to enjoy our country, to take advantage of everything that this great nation has to offer. Pretend laws will have to go away if the people would just stand with a stiff back and say no to unconstitutional acts. I want you to know something. We are still in control. I get excited to know that. Washington, D.C. doesn't have anything over on the state of Oklahoma. There is still a 10th Amendment. There is still a Bill of Rights. There is still a Constitution. And I want you to know that the state legislatures have more power than Congress does. Do you realize that? Congress doesn't get it. And most of the people, most of the state legislatures around this nation don't get it. But we do. I believe it's time that we show the politicians where the real balance of power comes from, and that's we the people. It is time that we stand up for what's right, to be that one voice in the crowd. These are trying times that we live in today, folks. But I believe it's our time to cross the Delaware. Let me just close by letting you know it's not too late. We're still in the game. And I believe that brighter days lie ahead for America. I truly do. 2.5 centuries ago, our founding fathers had a dream. They had a dream to birth a new nation where they could worship freely, where they could keep the fruits of their labor, and where they could live free. I want you to know that I too have a dream this morning. I have a dream that one day the children of God in this country would declare their faith once again without shame. I too have a dream that one day moms and dads would produce godly young men and women who will impact their schools, their generation, and our nation. I too have a dream that families would be restored with godly fathers who understand their responsibility to be the spiritual leader of their homes. I too have a dream that one day all life would be cherished and protected, and that America would repent of her national sin of killing the unborn. I too have a dream that America would return to the faith of our founding fathers, and churches would be filled with pastors speaking with authority on moral, spiritual, and political issues. I too have a dream that men and women who run for office would do so out of a deep-seated desire to serve other people, with a conviction of moral purity and constitutional understanding. I have a dream that one day we could say of these United States once again, "Blessed is a nation whose God is Lord." Folks, let's just not make this a dream. Let's make it a reality. Let's cross the Delaware. And as Ronald Reagan said, I appeal to your hopes, not your worst fears. I appeal to your confidence rather than your doubts. And my dream is that you will travel the road ahead with liberty's lamp guiding your steps and opportunity's arm steadying your way. This is our time. It's our duty. It is our destiny to once again secure the blessings of liberty and to hand them down to the next generation. God bless you. Stay dedicated to liberty. Thank you. Thank you.